At my husband's lavish party, his boss proposed, coming out as gay, and I got $100 million to leave. Chapter 1. The Golden Cage. The champagne bubbles caught the light from the crystal chandeliers like tiny diamonds, each one worth more than most people made in a month. I stood on the marble terrace of our Malibu mansion, watching the Pacific Ocean stretch endlessly toward the horizon, and wondered when my life had become a performance I no longer recognized. My name is Catherine Wells, though everyone calls me Cat, and at 36, I should have been living the American dream. My husband Marcus had built his tech empire from nothing, the classic Silicon Valley success story that made him worth 8 figures and climbing. We had the house, the cars, the charity galas, the perfect Instagram-worthy life that magazines loved to feature. But standing there in my custom Valentino gown, watching our guests mingle below on the infinity pool deck, I felt like I was suffocating in silk and diamonds. "Cat, darling, you look absolutely radiant." I turned to find Priscilla Thornton Hayes, the wife of Marcus's biggest investor, air-kissing my cheeks with practiced precision. Her Botox-smoothed face barely moved as she smiled, a testament to Beverly Hills' finest cosmetic surgeons. "Thank you, Priscilla. You look lovely too." The lie rolled off my tongue as easily as breathing. After 15 years of marriage and 10 years of these parties, small talk had become muscle memory. "This party is simply divine. Marcus really outdid himself this time, though I suppose he had to, didn't he, with Richard Blackstone coming tonight." She lowered her voice conspiratorially. "I heard he's considering Marcus for that new position. CEO of the entire West Coast division. Can you imagine?" I could imagine. It's all Marcus had talked about for months. Richard Blackstone, the mysterious billionaire who owned half of the tech companies in California, was Marcus's boss and the key to everything my husband had been working toward. Tonight's party wasn't just a celebration, it was an audition. "Yes, it would be quite an opportunity," I replied, scanning the crowd for Marcus. I spotted him near the infinity pool, gesticulating wildly as he told some story to a group of investors. His sandy hair caught the golden hour light, and for a moment I remembered the 25-year-old Stanford MBA I'd fallen in love with. Before the money, before the pressure, before we'd become strangers sharing a bed. "Oh, speak of the devil," Priscilla whispered, and I followed her gaze to see a sleek black Tesla pulling up the circular driveway. "That must be him now, Richard Blackstone himself." My heart skipped a beat as the car door opened. I'd seen photos of Richard in Forbes and TechCrunch, but they hadn't prepared me for the man in person. Tall and lean, with silver-touched dark hair and penetrating blue eyes, he moved with the quiet confidence of someone who'd never had to prove himself to anyone. His perfectly tailored Tom Ford tuxedo probably cost more than most people's cars, but he wore it like he'd been born in formal wear. "Excuse me, Priscilla," I murmured, making my way down the stone steps toward the main party area. As the hostess, I needed to greet our most important guest, even if every instinct told me to run in the opposite direction. Marcus had already intercepted Richard, pumping his hand with the enthusiasm of a golden retriever. "Richard, you made it! Cat, come meet Richard Blackstone." Richard turned toward me, and when our eyes met, something electric passed between us. It was like being struck by lightning while standing in perfectly clear weather. "Mrs. Wells," he said, taking my hand and bringing it to his lips in an old-fashioned gesture that should have seemed ridiculous, but instead made my knees weak. "Your reputation precedes you. Marcus is a very lucky man." "Please call me Cat," I managed, trying to ignore the way my skin tingled where he'd touched it. "And thank you for coming. I know how busy you must be." "Never too busy for exceptional company," he replied, his eyes never leaving mine. There was something in his gaze, a hunger that had nothing to do with the elaborate spread our caterers had prepared. Marcus, oblivious as always to any subtlety, clapped Richard on the back. "Come on, let me introduce you to everyone. Cat, make sure his glass never gets empty, would you?" And just like that, I was dismissed. After 15 years of marriage, I'd become the perfect accessory, beautiful, well-dressed and invisible when it mattered. The evening continued in a blur of networking and small talk. Marcus worked the room like the politician he'd never wanted to be, while I played my part as the devoted wife. But I found myself watching Richard throughout the night. Unlike the other tech bros with their casual arrogance and startup stories, he moved through conversations with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions and listening to the answers. When Mrs. Peterson from the cancer charity cornered him about donations, he didn't brush her off like most men would have. Instead, he pulled out his phone and made a 6-figure donation on the spot. "That was kind of you," I said when I found him alone on the terrace later, looking out at the ocean. He turned, and in the moonlight, his features looked carved from marble. "My mother died of cancer when I was 12. Some causes are worth supporting. The simple honesty of it caught me off guard. In my world, charity was a tax write-off and a photo opportunity, but Richard spoke like someone who actually cared. "I'm sorry for your loss," I said softly. "It was a long time ago." He stepped closer, and I caught the scent of his cologne, something expensive and uniquely masculine. "Tell me, Kat, are you happy?" The question hit me like a physical blow. When was the last time anyone had asked me that? When was the last time I'd even asked myself? I started, then stopped. The honest answer was too dangerous to voice. "That's answer enough," he said gently. "You're wasted on him, you know. A woman like you deserves to be worshipped, not ignored." Before I could respond, Marcus's voice boomed across the terrace. "There you are." "Richard, I've been looking everywhere for you. The Hendersons want to meet you. They're thinking about investing in your new AI venture." Richard's expression shifted back to polite interest. "Of course." "Lead the way." As they walked away, Marcus's arm possessively around Richard's shoulders, I felt something crack inside my chest. For just a moment, I'd felt seen, valued, alive. Now I was alone again with the champagne and the fake smiles. Chapter 2: Secrets and Revelations. The party continued past midnight, but I'd long since stopped keeping track of time. I was in the kitchen, supervising the caterer's cleanup, when I heard raised voices coming from Marcus's study. The door was slightly ajar, and I could see him pacing back and forth while Richard sat calmly in the leather chair across from his desk. "Can't be serious," Marcus was saying, his voice pitched higher than usual. "After everything I've done for this company. All the late nights, the missed anniversaries, the—" "Marcus, please sit down," Richard interrupted, his voice steady and calm. "Let me explain." I knew I should walk away, give them privacy, but something kept me frozen in place. Maybe it was the way Richard had looked at me earlier, or maybe it was the growing certainty that my life was about to change forever. Marcus collapsed into his chair, running his hands through his hair. "I don't understand." "The Henderson deal, the Morrison acquisition. I closed them both ahead of schedule. My numbers are the best in the company." "Your work has been exemplary," Richard agreed. "That's not the issue." "Then what is?" Marcus's voice cracked. "Is it about money? Because I can work with whatever budget you—" "Marcus!" Richard leaned forward, his expression gentle but firm. "This isn't about your performance. This is about who I am." The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. I pressed closer to the door, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure they could hear it. "I don't follow," Marcus said finally. Richard stood and walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. "I've spent the last 20 years building an empire, surrounding myself with the best and brightest minds in technology, but I've also spent those 20 years hiding who I really am." "What are you talking about?" Richard turned back to face Marcus, and even from my limited view, I could see the vulnerability in his posture. "I'm gay, Marcus. I've known since I was a teenager, but I convinced myself that my career was more important than my personal life, that I could compartmentalize forever. The words hit me like a physical blow. Of all the things I'd expected to overhear, this wasn't even on the list. I gripped the doorframe to keep from falling. Marcus's voice was barely a whisper. "You're gay?" "Yes, and I'm tired of pretending otherwise. I'm 52 years old, Marcus. I've never been in love, never allowed myself to be vulnerable with another person. I've built a fortune, but I've never built a life." "I still don't understand what this has to do with—" "It has everything to do with you," Richard interrupted, "because somewhere along the way, while working with you these past 3 years, I fell in love with you." The world tilted sideways. I gripped the doorframe harder, my knuckles white with the strain. This couldn't be happening. This was not how my Tuesday night was supposed to go. Marcus made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. "Richard, I'm married. I've never—" "I know, and I'm not asking you to suddenly discover you're someone you're not. I'm simply telling you the truth. I love you, Marcus. I love your passion for your work, your dedication, the way you light up when you're talking about a new project. I love your terrible jokes and the way you eat pizza with a fork because you don't want to get your hands dirty." "Oh, God," Marcus whispered, and I could hear the tears in his voice. "Richard, I care about you. I do, but I can't. I'm not gay. I love my wife." The lie rang hollow even to my own ears. When was the last time Marcus had told me he loved me? When was the last time he'd looked at me the way Richard had looked at me tonight? "I know," Richard said softly, "and that's why I'm prepared to make this easier for everyone." "What do you mean?" Richard reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. "Kat deserves better than a marriage of convenience. You deserve the chance to discover who you really are without the pressure of maintaining a facade. And I deserve the chance to find happiness before it's too late." "Richard, you're scaring me. I want to offer Kat $100 million to grant you an amicable divorce." The words echoed in the sudden silence. $100 million to leave my marriage, to set Marcus free to explore whatever this was with Richard, to finally escape the golden cage I'd been living in. "You can't be serious," Marcus breathed. "I've never been more serious about anything in my life. Kat gets the money, enough to live however she chooses for the rest of her life. You get your freedom to explore this, whatever this is between us, and I get the chance to see if we can build something real together. She'll never agree to it." "Won't I?" Both men turned toward the door as I stepped into the study. I'd heard enough, and hiding in the hallway like a teenager seemed suddenly ridiculous. Marcus jumped up from his chair. "Kat, how long have you been—" "Long enough," I said calmly, though my heart was racing like I'd just run a marathon. "Long enough to hear Richard's very generous offer." Richard studied my face carefully. "I apologize for the unconventional nature of this conversation, Kat. But I believe in honesty, even when it's uncomfortable." "Honesty," I repeated, tasting the word. "That's refreshing. It's been in short supply around here lately." Marcus looked like he'd been slapped. "Kat, what's that supposed to mean?" I walked over to the bar cart and poured myself 3 fingers of Marcus's best scotch, a 25-year-old single malt that cost more per bottle than most people made in a week. I'd need the liquid courage for what I was about to say. "It means, darling husband, that we've been living a lie for years. You don't love me, not the way a husband should love a wife. You love your work, you love your success, you love the idea of having the perfect trophy wife for these parties. But you don't love me." "That's not true." "When was the last time you made love to me, Marcus?" "Not just sex, but actually made love. When was the last time we had a conversation that didn't revolve around your business or your career goals? When was the last time you asked me how I was feeling about anything?" The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Marcus opened and closed his mouth several times, but no words came out. "That's what I thought," I said, taking a sip of the scotch. It burned going down, but it was a clean burn, honest and real. So Richard's offer isn't destroying a marriage. It's just making official what we've both known for years. We're roommates playing house, not husband and wife. Richard stepped forward slightly. Kat, I want you to know that this offer comes with no strings attached. You'd be free to do whatever you want, go wherever you want. The money would be yours completely. $100 million, I repeated, letting the number roll around in my mouth like fine wine. That's quite a golden parachute. You're worth every penny, Richard said, and the sincerity in his voice made my chest tighten. Any man who doesn't see that is a fool. Marcus finally found his voice. This is insane. You can't just buy my wife. He's not buying me, I said sharply. He's offering me freedom. There's a difference. But what about everything we've built together? This house, our life, our... What life, Marcus? I set down the scotch glass harder than necessary, and it made a sharp crack against the mahogany bar. The life where I smile and nod while you talk business with your friends. The life where I plan elaborate parties to advance your career. The life where I've become invisible even to myself. You're being dramatic. Am I? Tell me, what's my favorite book? What do I do when I can't sleep? What's my biggest fear? I waited, but he just stared at me blankly. You don't know, do you? After 15 years of marriage, you don't know anything about who I am beyond what I can do for your image. That's not fair. Fair? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. What's not fair is that it took a stranger 15 minutes to see me more clearly than my husband has in 15 years. Richard cleared his throat gently. Perhaps I should leave you two to discuss this privately. No, I said quickly, surprising myself with the vehemence in my voice. Stay. This conversation involves all of us. Marcus slumped back into his chair, looking suddenly much older than his 39 years. I don't understand how we got here. We got here because we stopped being honest with each other a long time ago, I said softly. Maybe we stopped being honest with ourselves too. So what happens now? Marcus asked, looking between Richard and me like we held all the answers. I walked over to the window and looked out at the party remnants scattered across our perfect lawn. A few servers were stacking chairs, and the valet was bringing the last few cars around for departing guests. Our beautiful, hollow life laid bare under the California stars. Now, I said, turning back to face both men, I think we all need to decide what we really want. Chapter 3. The Point of No Return. The silence in the study was deafening. Marcus sat hunched in his chair, staring at his hands, while Richard remained standing by the window, giving us both space to process. I found myself studying my husband's face, looking for any sign of the man I'd fallen in love with in college. Marcus Wells had been magnetic at 24. Brilliant, ambitious, full of dreams about changing the world through technology. I was finishing my master's in art history at Stanford, working part-time at a gallery in Palo Alto, when he'd walked in looking for something to put on his apartment walls. He'd been so earnest, asking me to explain every piece, hanging on my words like I was the most fascinating person he'd ever met. "What are you thinking about?" he asked quietly, finally looking up at me. "Us," I admitted. "How we used to be. We can be that again," he said desperately. "Kat, we don't have to throw away 15 years of marriage because of one conversation." "Don't we?" I moved away from the window, closer to where he sat. "Marcus, answer me honestly. When Richard told you he loved you, what did you feel?" He flinched like I'd slapped him. "I felt confused, shocked. That's not what I asked." "What did you feel?" Richard spoke up quietly from across the room. "Marcus, there's no judgment here. Whatever you felt, whatever you're feeling, it's valid." Marcus looked between us, and I saw something crack in his carefully constructed facade. I felt terrified, because part of me was flattered, maybe even excited. The admission hung in the air like smoke. I felt a strange mix of heartbreak and relief. Heartbreak for the end of my marriage, relief that we were finally telling the truth. "And what do you feel when you look at me now?" I asked gently. Marcus's eyes filled with tears. "I feel guilty. I feel like I failed you. I feel like I've been living someone else's life for so long that I don't know who I really am anymore. Oh, honey, I said, and despite everything, my heart ached for him. I knelt beside his chair and took his hands in mine. You haven't failed me. We've failed each other. We got so caught up in playing the parts we thought we were supposed to play that we forgot to figure out who we actually are. I do love you, Kat. Maybe not the way I should, but I do love you. I know, and I love you too, but we both deserve more than not the way we should, don't we? He squeezed my hands, and for the first time in years, I felt like we were actually connecting. So what do we do? I looked over at Richard, who was watching us with an expression of profound sadness and hope. We be brave, we tell the truth, we stop pretending. Marcus followed my gaze to Richard. Richard, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Always. If Kat weren't in the picture, if we'd met as single men, do you think I would have felt this way about you sooner? Richard considered the question carefully. I think you've been attracted to men for longer than you're ready to admit. I think you married Kat because she's extraordinary and because it was what you thought you were supposed to do. But I also think there's a part of you that's been waiting for permission to explore who you really are. Jesus, Marcus whispered, running his hands through his hair. I think you might be right. I stood up, my decision crystallizing like sugar in water. Then we all know what we need to do. Kat, Marcus started, but I held up a hand. Let me finish. Marcus, you need to figure out who you are when you're not performing for other people. Richard, you need to learn how to be vulnerable with someone you care about. And I need to remember who I was before I became Mrs. Marcus Wells and the money, Richard asked quietly. I looked at him, really looked at him. He was offering me more money than I could spend in 3 lifetimes, asking for nothing in return except my husband's freedom. It was either the most generous gesture I'd ever witnessed or the most expensive midlife crisis in history. Either way, it was my ticket out of a life that had been slowly suffocating me. The money, I said slowly, would give me the freedom to find out who I'm supposed to be. I could travel, go back to school, start that art foundation I used to dream about. I could have a life that's actually mine. You could do all of that without divorcing me, Marcus said desperately. We could have an arrangement. Separate bedrooms, separate lives, but we could stay married. And then what? We pretend for another 15 years, we get older and lonelier and more bitter. We watch Richard find someone else because you're too scared to admit what you want. Marcus looked at Richard, and I saw something pass between them, a moment of recognition that transcended words. I am scared, he admitted. I'm terrified. Of what? Richard asked gently. Of everything. Of being gay in this industry, even though I know it shouldn't matter anymore. Of disappointing my family. Of not knowing how to be with a man. Of losing Kat and realizing I've made the biggest mistake of my life. Fear is just information, I said, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. It tells you what matters to you, what you're not ready to lose. But it shouldn't be the thing that makes your decisions for you. When did you become so wise? Marcus asked with a watery smile. Probably around the time I realized I'd rather be alone and authentic than coupled and miserable. Richard stepped closer to both of us. I want you both to know that this offer, all of it, comes with no timeline pressure. Take as much time as you need to think it through. Talk to lawyers, therapists, whoever you need to talk to. This is the biggest decision any of us will ever make. No, I said, surprising all of us. It's not. What do you mean? Marcus asked. The biggest decision we made was to stop being honest with each other years ago. This is just us finally dealing with the consequences of that decision. I walked back to the bar and poured myself another finger of scotch. Outside, the last of the catering trucks was pulling away, and our house looked like a movie set after filming had wrapped, beautiful and empty and waiting for the next scene to begin. I want to ask you something, Richard, I said, not turning around. Why 100 million? That's not just generous, it's absurd. Because you're not just giving me your husband, Richard replied. You're giving me the chance to stop being afraid. You're giving me the possibility of love for the first time in my life. How do you put a price on that? I turned back to face them both. Marcus was looking at Richard with an expression I'd never seen before: wonder, curiosity, and something that might have been longing. Richard was looking at Marcus the same way he'd looked at me earlier, like he was seeing something precious and fragile that he was afraid to touch. $100 million, I said again, letting the number settle in the room like expensive perfume. For most people, that's impossible money. Life-changing money. But for you, Richard, what is it? A year's income, 2 years. Does it matter? It matters because I want to understand. Is this generosity or is this guilt? Richard was quiet for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. It's love, Kat. It's the most expensive love letter in history, but it's love. I'm in love with your husband, and I'm offering you enough money to build any life you want because I think you deserve that chance. We all deserve that chance. And what if I said no? What if I decided to fight for my marriage? Then I'd respect that decision and find another job. I meant what I said. There are no strings attached to this offer. It's not blackmail or coercion. It's just hope. I set down my glass and walked over to where Marcus sat. I cupped his face in my hands, studying the features I'd memorized over 15 years of marriage. Do you want me to fight for us? He leaned into my touch, closing his eyes. I want you to be happy. For the first time in years, I want you to do something just because it's what you want, not because it's what I need, or what looks good, or what's expected. What I want, I repeated softly. I'm not sure I remember how to figure that out. Then maybe it's time to learn, Richard said. I looked at this man who was offering to buy my freedom, who was risking everything for the chance at love with someone he might not even be able to have. You know this could all blow up in your face, right? Marcus might decide he's not gay after all. He might take your money and run back to women. He might break your heart. Yes, Richard said simply, but the alternative is spending the rest of my life wondering what if, and I'm too old for that kind of regret. Marcus opened his eyes and looked at me. What do you think, Kat? Are we brave enough to find out who we really are? I thought about the woman I'd been at 21, the one who spent hours in museums and dreamed of opening galleries in Paris and Rome. I thought about the conversations I'd stopped having, the dreams I'd stopped pursuing, the parts of myself I'd set aside to be the perfect wife for an ambitious man. Yes, I said, the word coming out stronger than I'd expected. I think we are. Chapter 4. The Art of Letting Go. 3 weeks later, I was sitting in the office of Beverly Hills' most expensive divorce attorney, listening to her explain prenuptial agreements and asset division with the kind of clinical detachment usually reserved for autopsy reports. The good news, Victoria Blackwood was saying, her perfectly manicured fingers drumming against her mahogany desk, is that your husband seems remarkably motivated to make this as painless as possible. In 20 years of practice, I've never seen someone so eager to give their spouse everything they're asking for. He feels guilty, I said, staring out her floor-to-ceiling windows at the palm trees lining Rodeo Drive. We both do. Guilt is a powerful motivator in divorce proceedings, Victoria agreed. Though I have to ask, are you absolutely certain about the financial arrangement? $100 million is an extraordinary settlement, even by Beverly Hills standards. I turned back to face her. Victoria Blackwood was exactly the kind of woman I'd always thought I'd become. Impeccably dressed, ruthlessly intelligent, completely in control of her own destiny. At 55, she'd built one of the most successful family law practices on the West Coast by understanding that divorce, at its heart, was just another business transaction. I'm certain, I said, though I have to admit the number still doesn't feel real. It will when it hits your bank account. Now, let's talk about the logistics. Mr. Blackstone's attorneys have proposed a very straightforward arrangement. He provides the settlement funds, you file for no-fault divorce citing irreconcilable differences, and the whole thing should be finalized within 6 months. That fast? California has streamlined the process considerably, especially when both parties are in agreement. No custody issues, no contested property division, no alimony disputes. It's refreshingly simple. Simple. I almost laughed at the word. Nothing about this situation was simple, even if the legal paperwork made it look straightforward. There is one thing, Victoria continued, sliding a thick document across the desk. Mr. Blackstone has insisted on including a rather unusual clause in the settlement agreement. I picked up the document and flipped to the highlighted section. The legal language was dense, but the meaning was clear. If Marcus and Richard's relationship didn't work out within 2 years, I was required to return $50 million of the settlement money. He wants a money-back guarantee? I asked incredulously. It appears so. My colleagues in his legal team say he was very insistent about this clause, something about not wanting to profit from someone else's pain if the whole arrangement falls apart. I set the document down and rubbed my temples. Even in the middle of dismantling his life, Richard was trying to be honourable. It was either admirable or exhausting. I wasn't sure which. What happens if I refuse the clause? Then the settlement drops to $50 million, no strings attached. $50 million was still more money than I'd ever dreamed of having. But the clause itself intrigued me. Richard was betting half the settlement on his relationship with Marcus working out. It was either the confidence of a man in love or the naivety of someone who'd never had his heart broken. I'll keep the clause, I decided. If this whole thing implodes, I'll have enough money to disappear somewhere tropical and drink expensive wine while I figure out what went wrong. Victoria smiled, the first genuine expression I'd seen from her all afternoon. I like you, Kat. Most of my clients are so bitter by the time they get here that they've forgotten how to laugh about anything. Ask me again in 6 months. I might be singing a different tune, possibly. Though from what I've observed, you seem to be handling this with remarkable grace. Not many women would be so generous to their husband's new romantic interest. I considered her words carefully. Was I being generous, or was I just eager to escape? The truth was probably somewhere in between. Richard isn't the villain in this story, I said finally. Neither is Marcus, really. We're all just people who got lost somewhere along the way and are trying to find our way back to who we're supposed to be. That's a very evolved perspective. Or very expensive therapy, I said dryly. I've been seeing Dr. Morrison 3 times a week since this whole thing started. Dr. Sarah Morrison had been recommended by the same friend who'd recommended Victoria. A specialist in high-net-worth relationship transitions, she had a practice in Santa Monica filled with the casualties of Beverly Hills marriages. Her office felt more like a spa than a therapist's office, all white furniture and succulents, and the kind of carefully curated calm that money could buy. How's that going? Victoria asked. Enlightening. Apparently I've been avoiding difficult conversations for most of my adult life. Who knew? Most of my clients have the same problem. It's amazing how many multi-million-dollar divorces could have been prevented with a few honest conversations earlier in the marriage. I thought about my session with Dr. Morrison that morning, where we talked about my tendency to prioritize other people's comfort over my own authenticity. It was a pattern that went back to childhood, the daughter of 2 busy doctors who learned early that being agreeable and low maintenance was the best way to get attention. Dr. Morrison says I need to figure out what I actually want before I make any major life decisions, I said. The problem is, I'm not sure I've ever really known what I wanted. I've always been too busy figuring out what other people needed from me. And what do you think you want now? The question hung in the air between us. What did I want? For the first time in my adult life, I had unlimited resources and unlimited time to figure it out. It was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. I want to matter, I said slowly, not as someone's wife or someone's accessory, but as myself. I want to build something that wouldn't exist without me. I want to wake up excited about my day instead of just trying to get through it. Those are good goals, achievable ones with your resources? Maybe, though I'm starting to realize that all the money in the world can't buy you purpose. That's something you have to find on your own. Victoria glanced at her Cartier watch. I'm afraid we'll need to wrap up soon. I have another client in 15 minutes. But I want you to know that you're welcome to call me any time if you have questions or concerns about the process. Thank you. I stood and gathered my purse, a Hermes bag that had cost more than most people's monthly rent. Soon, everything I owned would be a reminder of the life I was leaving behind. Victoria, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you think I'm making the right choice? She was quiet for a moment, studying my face with the kind of intensity that probably served her well in court. I think you're making the brave choice. Whether that's the right choice remains to be seen, but in my experience, regret usually comes from the risks we don't take, not the ones we do. I left Victoria's office and found myself walking aimlessly down Rodeo Drive, past boutiques I'd shopped in countless times, and restaurants where Marcus and I had celebrated deal closings and anniversaries. Everything looked the same, but I felt like a tourist in my own life. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. How did the meeting go? Fine, I texted back. All very civilized and expensive. Are you okay? I stopped walking and stared at the question. Was I okay? I was about to divorce my husband so he could explore his sexuality with his billionaire boss. I was about to become richer than I'd ever imagined, while simultaneously losing the only life I'd ever known as an adult. I was about to find out if I was brave enough to reinvent myself at 36. I will be, I texted back. It wasn't quite an answer to his question, but it was the most honest response I could give. Richard wants to take us to dinner tonight. Nothing fancy, just the three of us. He thinks we should talk through some of the practical details, the three of us. A month ago, that phrase would have meant Marcus and me and whatever business partner or client we were entertaining. Now it meant the three adults trying to navigate the most unconventional divorce settlement in California history. Where? That little Italian place in Manhattan Beach you like. Nonna's. I smiled despite myself. Nonna's was where Marcus had proposed 15 years ago. A tiny family-owned restaurant with checkered tablecloths and terrible wine, but the best osso buco in Los Angeles. It was an odd choice for discussing the end of our marriage, but somehow fitting. What time? 7. Richard's driving. Of course he was. Richard seemed to be orchestrating every detail of our lives now, though not in a controlling way. More like someone who was used to solving complex problems and couldn't help but apply that skill to our situation. I'll be there. I put my phone away and continued walking past the gleaming storefronts and perfectly manicured sidewalks of Beverly Hills. In a few months, I could live anywhere in the world. New York, Paris, Tokyo, anywhere except the life I was leaving behind. Chapter 5. Dinner for 3 nonnas hadn't changed in 15 years. The same faded family photos covered the walls, the same smell of garlic and oregano filled the air, and the same elderly Italian woman, presumably Nonna herself, still worked the cash register with the fierce efficiency of someone who'd been doing the same job for decades. I arrived first, which was unusual. Marcus and I had a long-standing agreement that whoever arrived first ordered a bottle of the House Red and pretended not to notice how terrible it was. Tonight, I ordered a bottle of their best Chianti and told myself it was a celebration, though I wasn't sure what I was celebrating yet. Richard arrived 5 minutes later, scanning the crowded restaurant until he spotted me in our usual corner booth. He looked different out of his expensive suits, more relaxed in dark jeans and a simple navy sweater, though he still moved with that quiet confidence that seemed to park crowds without effort. "You look beautiful," he said as he slid into the booth across from me. "How did the meeting with Victoria go?" "Smoothly. Apparently you're making her job very easy." I poured him a glass of wine and watched him taste it without making a face. Either he had better manners than Marcus and me, or his palate was less refined than I'd assumed. "Good. I want this to be as painless as possible for everyone involved." About that clause, I said, cutting straight to the point, the one where I give back half the money if you and Marcus don't work out. Richard set down his wineglass and met my eyes. You have concerns about it? I have questions about it. Are you hedging your bets, or are you really that confident this will work? Neither, he said quietly. I'm that terrified it won't. The honesty of the answer caught me off guard. I'd expected confidence or business logic, not vulnerability. Explain. Richard was quiet for a moment, watching the other diners around us. A family with 3 young children occupied the table next to ours, the parents trying to maintain civilized conversation while managing spilled juice and flying pasta. At the bar, a couple in their 70s shared a pizza and finished each other's sentences. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that 3 strangers were sitting 10 feet away discussing a $100 million divorce settlement. I've spent my entire adult life building walls around my personal feelings, Richard said finally. I convinced myself that emotional distance was the price of success, that vulnerability was a luxury I couldn't afford. But now I'm 52 years old and I'm finally admitting that I want something more than money and power. I want love, Kat, real love, with all the mess and risk that comes with it. And the clause? Is my way of making sure I don't profit from destroying your marriage if I'm wrong about Marcus. If this doesn't work, if he decides he's not gay, or if we're not compatible, or if I'm just a rich old man having an expensive midlife crisis, then I don't want to keep money that should have been used to rebuild your life. I studied his face in the dim restaurant lighting. You really think there's a 50% chance this won't work out? I think there's a 50% chance of everything in life. Love, failure, happiness, heartbreak. The odds are always roughly even. The only way to improve them is to be brave enough to try. That's either very wise or very naive. Probably both. Marcus arrived just as our appetizers were being served, looking harried and apologetic as he slid into the booth next to Richard. Sorry I'm late. Conference call with the Tokyo office ran long. Some things never change, I said with a smile that held no malice. Marcus's chronic lateness had been a source of arguments throughout our marriage, but tonight it just felt familiar. How are you doing? Marcus asked, and I could hear the genuine concern in his voice. We'd been civil with each other over the past few weeks, but there was still an awkwardness between us, like former lovers trying to figure out how to be friends. I'm okay. Still processing everything, but okay. Richard reached across the table and briefly touched my hand. This has to be harder for you than for either of us. We're moving toward something. You're leaving something behind. Maybe, I said. Or maybe I'm moving towards something too, and I just don't know what it is yet. Marcus picked at his bruschetta nervously. Dr. Morrison says that's normal, the not knowing part. You're seeing Dr. Morrison too? I asked, surprised. Richard suggested it. He's been in therapy for years, apparently. I looked at Richard with new interest. Years? Since my mother died, Richard admitted. I was angry for a long time, and therapy helped me figure out how to channel that anger into something productive. Building a business empire, as it turns out, is excellent angry energy management. And now I'm trying to figure out how to channel love into something productive. Turns out that's much harder. Marcus laughed, the first genuine laugh I'd heard from him in weeks. You make it sound like a business problem to solve. Isn't it, in a way? 2 people trying to build something together, allocating resources, managing risk, planning for the future. God, you really are a tech mogul, I said, shaking my head. Love as a startup venture. Laugh if you want, but at least I'm treating it seriously. I'm not stumbling around hoping feelings will magically work themselves out. Marcus sobered at that. Is that what you think I've been doing? Stumbling around. I think you've been incredibly brave, Richard said gently. Admitting you might be gay at 39 after 15 years of marriage in an industry that's supposed to be progressive but still judges everything. That takes courage. it doesn't feel brave. It feels terrifying. Good, I said. Terrifying usually means you're doing something important. We fell into a comfortable silence, eating our appetizers and watching the controlled chaos of the restaurant around us. This felt surreal, having dinner with my husband and his potential boyfriend, discussing the end of my marriage like we were planning a vacation. "Can I ask you both something?" Marcus said suddenly. "Of course," Richard and I replied almost simultaneously. "Do you think we're all completely insane?" I considered the question seriously. A month ago, if someone had told me I'd be sitting in this restaurant having this conversation, I would have recommended therapy and a good vacation. But now, looking at these two men who were trying so hard to be honest about what they wanted, insanity seemed like the wrong word. "I think we're trying to be authentic for the first time in years," I said finally. "That might look like insanity from the outside, but it feels like sanity to me." "Even the money part," Marcus pressed. $100 million is an insane amount of money, Kat. Is it? Richard makes that much in a good quarter, probably. For him, it's expensive but not ruinous. For me, it's life-changing but not undeserved. I've spent 15 years building your career and managing your life. Think of it as severance pay. Richard smiled at that. I prefer to think of it as an investment. In what? In all of us getting the chance to be happy. That seems like a good return on investment to me. The main courses arrived, and we spent the next hour talking about practical details. Marcus would keep the Malibu house, but I could take anything I wanted from it. The cars would be divided based on who actually drove them, which meant I got the Tesla, and Marcus got everything else, since he was the car enthusiast. Our art collection would be the most complicated asset to divide, since we'd acquired most of it together, and both had strong opinions about individual pieces. "You should keep the Monet," Marcus said as we shared tiramisu. "You're the one who found it, and you love it more than I do." "It's worth $3 million, Marcus." "So? You're getting $100 million from Richard. What's $3 million between friends?" Friends. The word hung in the air between us. Were we friends? Could we be friends? We'd been so many things to each other over the years. Lovers, partners, roommates, strangers sharing a name. Maybe friendship was what we'd been trying to get back to all along. "I do love that painting," I admitted. "Then it's yours." Richard had been quiet during most of the practical discussion, but now he spoke up. "There's something else we should talk about. The timeline." "What about it?" I asked. "How do you want to handle the transition? Do you want to wait until the divorce is final before Marcus and I explore this? Do you want us to wait until you've moved out? How do we make this as comfortable as possible for everyone?" I appreciated that he was asking, but the question made my chest tight anyway. Soon, Marcus would be sleeping in someone else's bed, learning someone else's body, building inside jokes and shared history with someone who wasn't me. It was what I wanted for him, what I wanted for both of them, but that didn't make it easy to think about. "I think," I said carefully, "that artificial timelines might make this harder than it needs to be. We're all adults. We're all trying to do the right thing. Maybe we should just see how it unfolds naturally." "Are you sure?" Marcus asked. "Because I don't want you to feel like I'm rushing into anything or being disrespectful." "Marcus!" I reached across the table and took his hand. "You've spent the last 15 years being respectful and careful and appropriate. Maybe it's time to stop worrying about what's proper and start figuring out what makes you happy." He squeezed my hand. "What about you? What's going to make you happy?" It was the question I'd been avoiding, the one doctor. Morrison kept asking in different ways. What did I want? What would make me happy? "I want to travel," I said slowly, the words coming as I spoke them. "I want to see the Uffizi and the Louvre and the Met without rushing through because we had dinner reservations. I want to take a cooking class in Tuscany and learn to make pottery in Japan, and maybe write a book about something I actually care about." "That sounds wonderful," Richard said. "It sounds expensive," I added with a laugh. You can afford it now. I want to start a foundation, I continued, the ideas flowing faster now. Something focused on arts education for kids who can't afford it. I want to fund programs that bring art to public schools, sponsor scholarships for young artists, maybe even open galleries in underserved communities. Marcus smiled, the first real smile I'd seen from him all evening. You'd be incredible at that. You've always been passionate about making art accessible to everyone. And you, I asked Richard, what's going to make you happy? Honestly. This conversation makes me happy. The fact that we can sit here and talk about difficult things without screaming or throwing lawyers at each other. The fact that Marcus is holding your hand while talking about his future with me and nobody feels jealous or angry. The fact that we're all trying to take care of each other even while we're dismantling everything we thought we knew about our lives. You have low standards for happiness, I said teasingly. I have realistic standards for happiness. Most people never get to have conversations like this. Most people never get the chance to completely reinvent their lives. Most people never find love at 52. We're incredibly lucky, even if it doesn't always feel that way. We lingered over coffee until the restaurant started closing around us, talking about everything and nothing. Richard told us about growing up poor in Detroit, how he'd built his first company in his garage with money borrowed from his grandmother. Marcus talked about his fears regarding coming out publicly, especially in the tech world where image still mattered more than anyone wanted to admit. I found myself talking about the art gallery I'd dreamed of opening in college, how I'd given up that dream so gradually I hadn't even noticed it was gone. You could open it now, Richard pointed out. With your settlement, you could open galleries in 10 cities if you wanted. Maybe I will. When we finally left Nonna's, the three of us stood in the parking lot under the streetlights, none of us quite ready to end the evening. It felt like we were on the edge of something momentous, like we'd crossed some invisible line between our old lives and whatever came next. Thank you, Richard said quietly. Both of you, for trusting me with this, for being willing to take such an enormous risk. Thank you for seeing what Marcus and I couldn't see ourselves, I replied, that we deserved better than what we were settling for. Marcus hugged me first, holding me tight against his chest like he used to when we were first married. I love you, Kat. Not the way I should have, but I do love you. I love you too, and I want you to be happy, really, genuinely happy. I want the same for you. Then, awkwardly but deliberately, I hugged Richard. He smelled like expensive cologne and possibility, and when he whispered thank you in my ear, I felt like I was giving away something precious and getting something even more valuable in return. As I drove home alone to our empty house, I realized that for the first time in years, I was excited about tomorrow. Not because of what I was leaving behind, but because of what I might be moving toward. Chapter 6. New Beginnings. 6 months later, I was standing in the window of a converted warehouse in the arts district of downtown Los Angeles, watching contractors install the last pieces of track lighting for what would soon be the Catherine Wells Gallery. The divorce had been finalized 3 weeks earlier, the settlement had cleared the bank 2 weeks after that, and now I was about to open my first solo venture with money that still felt imaginary. The lighting looks perfect, said James Chen, the young curator I'd hired away from LACMA with an offer he couldn't refuse and the promise of complete creative freedom. Very minimalist, very clean. It'll showcase the art without overwhelming it. I nodded, though I was only half listening. Through the large windows, I could see the familiar bustle of downtown LA. Food trucks, artists carrying portfolios, young professionals grabbing coffee before heading to their tech jobs. 6 months ago, I'd never spent more than an hour in this neighborhood. Now it was going to be my second home. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Saw the Times article about the gallery. Looks amazing. Proud of you. The LA Times had run a piece about my gallery the week before, calling it an ambitious new venture from philanthropist Catherine Wells, and speculating about whether my substantial recent divorce settlement would translate into meaningful support for emerging artists. The reporter had been respectful but persistent, clearly fishing for details about the settlement amount and the circumstances of my divorce. I'd stuck to the script Victoria had helped me prepare. Irreconcilable differences, mutual respect, excited about this new chapter? Thank you, I texted back. How are things with you? Good, really good. Richard says, hi. I smiled at that. Marcus and Richard had been living together for 2 months now, and from what I could observe from the outside, they seemed genuinely happy. Marcus had never looked more relaxed, and Richard had developed a habit of smiling at random moments that was utterly charming. They'd been photographed together at a few industry events, and while the tech press had initially been surprised by Richard's sudden openness about his sexuality, the story had quickly become old news. Apparently, even in gossip-hungry Silicon Valley, two successful men falling in love wasn't scandalous enough to sustain interest for long. Kat? James was looking at me expectantly. The caterer wants to know if you have any dietary restrictions for the opening reception menu. Sorry, what? The opening reception. Tomorrow night. 300 guests, remember? Right. Tomorrow night was the gallery's official opening, a carefully curated event designed to introduce the space to LA's art community and attract the kind of collectors who could keep us in business. I'd been planning it for months, but somehow the reality of it hadn't quite sunk in yet. No dietary restrictions, I said. Just make sure there's enough champagne. Art people drink more than tech people in my experience. Will Mr. Wells and Mr. Blackstone be attending? They're on the list. I debated whether to invite them, but Dr. Morrison had convinced me that avoiding them entirely would be more awkward than including them. Along with half of Beverly Hills and most of the contemporary art world, no pressure. James grinned. I live for pressure. That's why you hired me. He was right about that. James was 28, brilliant, and hungry in the way that only young people with something to prove could be. He'd grown up poor in San Francisco's Chinatown, worked his way through Berkeley and then Columbia for his master's in art history, and spent the last 3 years building a reputation as one of the most promising young curators on the West Coast. When I'd called him about the gallery position, he'd initially been skeptical. Another rich divorced woman playing at being an art patron. But when I'd shown him my vision for the space and my commitment to supporting emerging artists, he'd gotten excited enough to quit his job at one of the most prestigious museums in the country. Have you decided what you're wearing tomorrow? He asked. Something that says serious art patron but not trying too hard. So, expensive but understated? Exactly. I have a Stella McCartney dress that should work. Perfect. You know, for someone who's never run a gallery before, you have excellent instincts about this. I've been thinking about this for 15 years, I admitted. I just never had the freedom to actually do it before. Well, you definitely have the freedom now. That was an understatement. The settlement money had given me more than financial freedom. It had given me the luxury of not caring whether the gallery was immediately profitable. I could take risks on unknown artists, experiment with unconventional exhibitions, and focus on building something meaningful rather than just something commercially viable. It was a privilege that very few people in the art world could afford, and I was determined not to waste it. My phone rang, and I glanced at the screen to see Richard's name. I'd been surprised by how often he checked in with me, always thoughtful, never intrusive. He seemed genuinely invested in making sure I was thriving in my new life. Hi, Richard. Kat, how are you? How's the gallery preparation going? Chaotic, but good. Are you and Marcus still planning to come tomorrow? Wouldn't miss it. Marcus is incredibly excited to see what you've built. We both are. There was something in his voice, an undertone I couldn't quite identify. Is everything okay? Actually, I was calling because I wanted to ask you something. Do you have a few minutes to talk? Of course. James, can you give me a minute? James nodded and headed toward the back office, leaving me alone in the main gallery space. The afternoon light was streaming through the windows, illuminating the white walls where tomorrow night my carefully selected collection of emerging artists would hang. In 24 hours, this empty space would be filled with people drinking champagne and discussing the merits of contemporary photography and conceptual sculpture. It felt surreal. "What's on your mind?" I asked. "Marcus wants to propose to me." The words hit me like a physical blow, even though I'd been expecting something like this eventually. Of course, they were moving toward marriage, they were in love, they were happy, and same-sex marriage was legal in California. It was the logical next step. "That's wonderful, Richard. Congratulations." "We haven't done it yet." He's been dropping hints for weeks, and yesterday he asked me how I felt about marriage in general. I think he's planning something elaborate for our 6-month anniversary next week. "And how do you feel about marriage in general?" "Terrified," he said with a laugh. "I've never been in a relationship longer than 6 months, let alone thought about marrying someone. But also excited, more excited than I've ever been about anything." "Then what's the problem?" Richard was quiet for so long, I thought the call had dropped. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft. "I wanted to ask your permission." "My permission?" I know that probably sounds old-fashioned or unnecessary, but Marcus was your husband for 15 years. You loved him, built a life with him, supported him through everything. It feels wrong to marry him without at least acknowledging that history and making sure you're okay with it. I felt tears prick at the eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of gratitude for this man who was thoughtful enough to call, generous enough to care about my feelings, brave enough to love my ex-husband so completely. "Richard," I said, my voice steadier than I'd expected, "you don't need my permission to marry Marcus. But since you asked, yes, you absolutely have it. You have my blessing, my support, and my genuine happiness for both of you." "Thank you. That means more to me than you know. Can I ask you something now?" "Anything." "Are you going to say yes when he proposes?" "Yes," Richard said without hesitation, assuming he actually asks and I'm not misreading all the hints. "You're not misreading them. Marcus has never been subtle about anything in his life." "True. God, Kat, I can't believe this is my life now. 6 months ago, I was convinced I'd spend the rest of my life alone. Now I'm about to marry the most wonderful man I've ever met." "You deserve it. You both do. So do you. How are you doing, really? Not just with the gallery, but with everything." I looked around the space I'd created, thought about the artists whose work would soon fill these walls, considered the foundation I was planning to start next year. I'm doing well. Better than well, actually. I'm doing things that matter to me for the first time in years. "Any romantic prospects on the horizon?" I laughed. "Not even on the distant horizon. I'm still figuring out who I am when I'm not Mrs. Marcus Wells. Adding another person to the equation seems premature." "Fair enough. But for what it's worth, whoever eventually wins your heart is going to be incredibly lucky." "Thank you for saying that." "I mean it. Marcus talks about you sometimes, about how generous you've been through all of this, how gracefully you've handled everything. He says you're the strongest person he's ever known." "He's biased. We're friends now, which means he only remembers my good qualities." "Maybe. Or maybe you're stronger than you give yourself credit for." After we hung up, I stood alone in my gallery for a long time, processing the conversation. Marcus was going to propose to Richard. They were going to get married, probably in some beautiful ceremony that would be featured in architectural magazines and society pages. They were going to build a life together, the kind of life Marcus and I had never quite managed to create, and I was genuinely happy for them. 6 months ago, that would have seemed impossible. But now, surrounded by the work that was quickly becoming my passion, financially secure enough to take risks and make choices based on what I wanted rather than what I needed, I could honestly say that I was grateful for the way everything had unfolded. My phone buzzed with another text, this one from an unknown number. Miss Wells, this is David Kim from the Vincent Price Art Museum. I saw the Times article about your gallery and would love to discuss a potential collaboration. Are you available for coffee this week? I smiled and typed back. I'd love to. When works for you? Tomorrow night, I would open the gallery I'd dreamed about for 15 years. Next week, Marcus would probably propose to the man he loved, and I would continue building a life that was entirely my own, funded by the most expensive love story in Beverly Hills history. It wasn't the ending I'd expected 6 months ago, but it was turning out to be exactly the beginning I'd needed. Epilogue, 1 year later. The invitation arrived on cream-coloured cardstock with elegant gold lettering. Marcus Wells and Richard Blackstone request the pleasure of your company at their wedding celebration. Below the formal language was a handwritten note from Marcus. Kat, we really hope you'll be there. It wouldn't feel right without you. I was sitting in my office at the gallery, which had become profitable faster than anyone had expected. James and I had just finished installing our latest exhibition, a groundbreaking show featuring young artists from underrepresented communities, and the early reviews were already calling it transformative and essential viewing. The foundation was officially launching next month with an initial endowment of $25 million and partnerships with school districts across Southern California. Dr. Morrison said my commitment to arts education probably had something to do with my own need to create beauty in the world, but I didn't care about the psychology of it. I just cared that kids who looked like I did at their age would have access to the kind of programs that had shaped my love of art. I picked up my phone and called Marcus. Kat! Perfect timing. Richard and I were just talking about the seating chart for the reception. I got your invitation. And of course I'll be there. I wouldn't miss it. Really? Because I know it might be weird, and if you're not comfortable. Marcus, I interrupted, stop overthinking it. I want to be there. I want to see you marry the man you love. God, it's still surreal to say that. The man I love. 6 months ago, I didn't even know I could feel this way about anyone. How are you feeling about everything? Nervous? Terrified, he admitted, but the good kind of terrified. Like I'm about to jump out of an airplane, but I know the parachute will work. That's a very Marcus analogy. Richard says the same thing. You two have been spending too much time analysing my metaphors. Through the gallery windows, I could see the late afternoon light hitting the sculptures in our outdoor installation space. A group of college students was gathered around one piece, sketching and taking notes. Everything I'd built over the past year felt solid and real in a way that my old life never had. How's Richard handling the wedding planning? I asked. Like a CEO planning a merger. He has spreadsheets, Kat. Colour-coded spreadsheets for flowers and catering and guest lists. It's simultaneously the most romantic and most business-like thing I've ever seen. Sounds like him. He wanted me to ask you something, actually. About the clause. The clause. I'd almost forgotten about Richard's money-back guarantee. What about it? It expires next month, 1 year from the date of our first, whatever you want to call it, first date, first time we admitted our feelings. Richard's not sure exactly how to calculate it, but he thinks the clock runs out around the time of the wedding. And he wants to know if you want to discuss any modifications to the settlement. He says the money is yours regardless, but if you want to adjust the amount based on how things have worked out, he's open to that conversation. I leaned back in my chair, considering. Richard had bet $50 million that his relationship with Marcus would last a year. They'd not only lasted, they'd thrived. They'd moved in together, blended their social circles, survived the media attention that came with Richard's coming out, and were now planning a wedding. By any reasonable measure, Richard had won his bet. What do you mean? I mean, Richard wasn't paying me to leave you. He was paying me to believe that all three of us deserved to be happy. And we are, aren't we? Happy? Marcus was quiet for a moment. Yeah, we really are. Then it was worth every penny. After we hung up, I sat in my office as the sun set over downtown LA, thinking about the strange mathematics of love and money and happiness. $97 million after taxes and legal fees to end a marriage that had been over in all but name for years. The most expensive divorce settlement in California history, and somehow the most generous thing anyone had ever done for me. I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago, beautiful, wealthy, miserable, invisible. Then I looked around at the life I'd built with Richard's money and my own determination. A thriving gallery, a foundation that would fund art programs for thousands of kids, work that mattered, friends who knew me as more than someone's wife. Richard had been right about one thing. The odds of any major life change working out were roughly 50-50. Love, divorce, new careers, cross-country moves, decisions to have children or not have children, all of it came down to rolling the dice and hoping for the best. But sometimes, if you were very lucky and very brave, you got to load the dice in your favor. And sometimes, if you were extraordinarily lucky and extraordinarily brave, someone else helped you load them. My phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. Miss Wells, this is Jennifer Martinez from the Whitney Museum. We're organizing a traveling exhibition on contemporary philanthropy in the arts, and we'd love to include your work with the foundation. Are you available for a call this week? I smiled and typed back, I'd be honored. When works for you? Outside my office window, the city lights were starting to twinkle, and somewhere across town, the man I'd been married to for 15 years was planning his wedding to someone else. In 2 weeks, I'd sit in a church and watch them exchange vows, and I'd cry happy tears for both of them. It wasn't the love story I'd started with, but it had turned out to be exactly the love story I'd needed. A love story about learning to love yourself, enough to set everyone free, and at $100 million, it was still the best investment any of us had ever made. The end.